A deluge, a cataclysm, the vengeful act of God. The Bible states only Noah and his family were spared. But was the Great Flood just a story? Or a catastrophic event which altered the course of human history? Peter Gandhi has written several controversial books on the origins of Christianity. Now, he is re-examining one of the most terrifying events described in the Old Testament. The story of Noah and the Great Flood.
The story that I was brought up with is in the Bible. Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh. And in the Quran, and Noah, when he cried aforetime, and we answered him and saved him and his people from the mighty trouble.
Tales of an earth-shattering flood are common to many cultures. Sumerian, Greek, Hindu, Chinese, Native American, in stories dating back millennia.
Way back before the Quran, here in the Epic of Gilgamesh, 2,000 years BC, the storm brought on by Adad swept even up to the heavens. Like an onslaught in battle, it rushed in on the people. It really is, everywhere you look, the story of a great flood.
Some scientists controversially maintain that a mega flood did hit Eastern Europe several thousand years ago. It's even referred to as the Noah Flood. And they believe it struck the lands surrounding the Black Sea. Gandhi flies to the Bulgarian capital, Sofia. He wants to find out what effects a huge flood may have had on this region's earliest civilizations, and what may have caused the Black Sea flood. Rising up outside the city is Mount Vitosha, a volcanic peak, pockmarked with caves. Gandhi makes his way up the mountain to meet Professor Yavor Shopov from the University of Sofia.
I've been told you can perhaps shed some light on this flood.
Yeah, but in order to do this, we have to go inside the cave.
At over 15 kilometers, this is the longest subterranean cave complex in Bulgaria. And it's deep. There are 6 different levels, a honeycomb of pitch black chambers.
This is a lot smaller than I thought it would be.
When these chambers flood, they flood quickly. Crawling through claustrophobically small tunnels, Shopov leads Gandhi to the site of his discovery.
Dr. Shopov? Where are you?
It takes almost an hour to reach the right spot. Finally, Shopov indicates they've arrived.
Wow. Is this the cave?
Yeah. This is just extraordinary.
The cave is lined with spectacular stalagmites and stalactites.
How can this cave tell us about the flood?
All these stalagmites, stalactites, and
They are formed in the result of rainwaters pass through the bedrock.
Like reading the rings on a tree trunk. By looking at the layers in these rock formations, geologists are able to calculate rainfall levels going back millennia. It was while studying these that Chopov discovered something extraordinary. One layer was far thicker than any of the others.
It has been formed 7,500 years ago, and there was 50 times present-day precipitations.
What do you think might have triggered this incredible rainfall?
We have a special theory about this, but in order to see it, we have to go to my labs in Sofia.
At Sophia University, Dr. Chopov has prepared a cross-section of a stone from the floor of the cave.
Here is one of the samples which we took from the cave.
In one of these particular bands that you discovered a time when there was a massive increase in rainfall. Do you have any idea as to what would have caused such a huge amount of rainfall?
Yes, if a very large asteroid would fall directly on the surface of the sun.
Chopov argues the huge increase in rainfall was triggered by an enormous asteroid or comet colliding with the sun. This collision resulted in a rapid and massive increase in solar radiation. NASA has captured images of such events from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, showing comets plunging into the sun, causing huge solar flares. Chopov calculates that after the comet hit the sun, there was a drastic and rapid rise in the Earth's temperature. Immense amounts of seawater evaporated, causing a colossal increase in rainfall.
That's the kind of event which is described in the historical sources.
It really is an incredible theory.
Oh, yes.
But how large do you think such an asteroid would have to be to have this effect?
It must be between 2 and 3 kilometers in radius. So it's really very big. There are not so many asteroids so big. So that's why, hopefully, this kind of event may happen quite rarely.
Chopov's conclusions, although hotly debated, are echoed in other theories that also argue there was a massive flood in the Black Sea region. They propose huge amounts of ice melted towards the end of the last ice age. Over 5,000 years, sea levels rose. Sometime in this period, Mediterranean water rushed through the Bosphorus at a rate of 40 cubic kilometers per day, 200 times the flow of the Niagara Falls. This flood transformed a huge inland lake into the Black Sea and significantly expanded the shoreline. To find evidence to back up the mega flood theory, Gandhi travels east to the shores of the Black Sea. He heads to the Bulgarian Institute of Oceanology to meet up with underwater archaeologist Professor Petko Dimitrov.
Professor Dimitrov, so
Yes.
pleased to meet you. So, Professor, what evidence do you have that the Black Sea was originally a freshwater lake?
Едно от първите доказателства за потопа в Черно море това е старите брегове на Черноморския басейн, които достойни на армейски. На 14-та бревали, което на Гучи, между 90 име.
So the Black Sea is the original shoreline of freshwater lake?
By analyzing samples taken by seabed, Dimitrov has also discovered ancient shell plankton that only have lived in fresh water. Dimitrov is convinced that the flood hit, engulfed, and wiped out Neolithic settlements on the shores of the lake. In 2011, a geological research ship, the Academic, undertook extensive underwater surveys. Leading the team, Konstantin Chetarev.
One day we were scanning the seabed and we found sort of a hump on the seabed, and we decided to send a probe and to take a sample of it.
When the probe was pulled up, the scientists began a detailed inspection of what they'd recovered. They soon realized they'd found something significant.
This way we found at that position this piece of wood, and that's our evidence. There's no way this piece of wood to be thrown from a ship or something. There's no way to be there, except there's an ancient village or something at that depth.
So this is evidence that there are settlements at the bottom of the Black Sea, human settlements.
I think so. We're waiting still for the carbon dating. And if it turns to be 7,600 years old, that's it, case closed.
But for now, this case is far from closed. Geologists from America's Oceanographic Institute, Woods Hole, have also taken core samples. They agree that the Black Sea region experienced mass flooding. But they calculate levels rose by 10 meters, compared to the Bulgarians' figure of 60, resulting in a far smaller area of land being flooded. Their results also challenge the dating of the Bulgarian stone from the cave floor. The Americans calculate the flood occurred 9,500 years ago. 2,500 years before Shopov claims torrential rain and floods took place. But many Bulgarian scientists are undaunted. They believe the Great Flood actually overwhelmed the very first European civilization. Dating back 7,000 years and centered on what is now the Bulgarian coastline. It's a radical challenge to the conventional historical view that the Minoans founded the first sophisticated European society 2,000 years later in Crete. Gandhi is keen to find any traces of the earlier civilization. He contacts a leading expert on Neolithic era Bulgaria, Dr. Todor Dimov of the Dobrich Museum. Gandhi and Dimov set out for the remote northeastern strip of the Bulgarian Black Sea coast. At Duran Kulak are the remnants of a Neolithic settlement dating back over 6,000 years. This was a settled, sophisticated community. It's called the Bulgarian Troy, but predates the ancient Greek city by more than 2,000 years. So far, 17 dwellings have been excavated.
Ние сега не можем да кажем защо. Може да е за по-лесно отопление през зимата, може да е защото е намалял броя на хората, които живеят в нея. Сградите са големи.
Dimov believes the large freshwater lake created a fertile environment perfect for farming.
Основата на изградената представа за райската градина, за мястото, където човек може да преживее малко по-леко, отколкото в пустинята на Египет. Защото имаме вода, имаме растителност, имаме животински свят. Тук са живели тогава и лъвове.
When the flood hit, the fertile land was drowned by salt water, and any surviving people were forced to migrate. Gandhi wants to find out more about these Neolithic lakeside dwellers, and the information is to be found just along the Black Sea coast. In 1972, a site with almost 300 graves was found just outside the port of Varna. They were dated as being more than 6,000 years old. Many remains were shipped to the Bulgarian Institute of Anthropology. Gandhi is in Sofia to meet Professor Jordan Jordanov.
Do you have any idea what these people might have looked like?
За да видим как са изглеждали тези хора, които са живяли почти преди 7000 години, единственият начин е пластичната антропологична реконструкция. Това е най-запазеният череп от Варненския некропол.
By studying the skull and the skeleton, Jordanov concludes the man was well fed and physically strong.
So what happened to them?
Аз не знам и едва ли някой би могъл да даде отговор. Къде са и защо са изчезнали тези хора, тяхната висока цивилизация, техните технически умения и тяхната култура. Това е един въпрос без отговор.
Many of the Varna graves contained numerous, highly sophisticated artifacts made from gold, copper, pottery, flint, and shells. The treasures of the necropolis are held at the Varna Archaeological Museum. Gandhi's guide to the spectacular hall is Hristo Smolenov.
I give you the oldest gold treasure in the world.
This is incredible. This is the famous Varna necropolis gold.
Yes.
This is such a privilege to see this. You've had this dated?
Yes, it's radiocarbon dated. And the results are middle of the 5th millennium before Christ. So 6,500 years ago.
But that's extraordinary. I mean, this pushes the history of European civilization way back.
Exactly. I'm sure that this gold hoard belongs to the first European civilization.
Mm-hmm. Just looking at this, it seems incredibly sophisticated.
Yes.
The technology, the design, it seems remarkable for the age of it.
Also represents the oldest science.
Science? I see gold objects. I don't see a mathematical system here.
When you start measuring these gold objects, you will see the dimensions of a very interesting geometry. The lengths of these two gold bull figurines are 5:3.
The designs are not just decorative. Smolenov believes the artifacts were created using advanced geometry.
The heights of the two bull figurines are also proportioned 22/14. This is actually pi/2.
Smolenov is convinced the ratio and dimensions of the jewelry is the most compelling proof that the people living around the Black Sea before the flood were, indeed, the earliest European civilization.
Do we know what happened to these people? Where did they go?
Although it was heavily hit by the flood waters, this civilization partially survived it, and obviously after recovering migrated to some other lands in more favorable conditions, and with it their knowledge migrated.
In some way out of that came the many other cultures which were flowered later. So out of that disaster, this is an essential part of the story of mankind.
Yeah.
Smolenov believes these ancient people were dispersed by the flood, but their knowledge reappeared. With the great flowering of Egyptian, Sumerian, and Greek civilizations, 1,000 to 2,000 years later.
It's hard to imagine, when you look out across the Black Sea today, that this was once a freshwater lake. And yes, the evidence suggests that there really was a massive flood here. The sea poured in, drowned this lake, and drove the people who lived here away. They were dispersed across the Mediterranean world, perhaps even then planting the seeds of European civilization.
It is debated whether the flood that happened here over 9,000 years ago was as cataclysmic as some suggest. But if the stories in the Bible, Quran, and Gilgamesh are a representation of real events, the flood was great enough to destroy communities, but also create new civilizations.